So yesterday I did a video talking about the WarnerMedia and Discovery Communications merger that is potentially expected to be finalized by mid-2022, which is a year from now. That of course is all depending on what factors and situations and things have to be worked out for it to meet that deadline. Now, I also brought up in the video that if you're an AEW fan, All Elite Wrestling, how is this going to affect AEW? What does the future hold for them once this merger is complete? Well, ironically, after I did that video this morning, I turn on YouTube on my television and I see several reports by Pro Wrestling Unlimited and other sources indicating that AEW has made several announcements. Now today, WarnerMedia has the upfront, I guess you can say, investors event going on, similar to Disney Investors Day or something. Maybe not of the same caliber, but you get the idea. And I guess throughout the day, it was announced, first of all, that Tony Khan and AEW had restructured their agreement with WarnerMedia as far as Dynamite's programming goes, as well as they made the announcement that on August 11th, which I think is a Friday, will be the premiere of the second AEW show on Turner Networks, which they've been talking about, called Rampage. And this is around, from what they reported, would be around 10 o'clock, 10 Eastern Pacific, 9 Central, I'm assuming, which means basically on Friday nights, you would get 3 hours of wrestling. But the big difference, unlike, let's say, a Monday night, it's not 3 hours of the same program. It's 2 hours of SmackDown and 1 hour of AEW. So you get a variety. You go from Fox to TNT for the time being. Because it was also announced today, it was also announced during that first announcement by Tony Khan and AEW and WarnerMedia, that not only did they restructure their contract for Dynamite, as well as add in the addition of AEW Rampage, to the schedule, but they also made the announcement that starting next year, either at the beginning of the year, spring, or whenever, that AEW Dynamite and AEW Rampage will be moving networks. That's right, they will be moving from one network to another, and in this case, they'll be moving from TNT to TBS. Now, a lot of people could speculate what, factors played into this decision, and, this being possibly part of the restructuring. And, there are some factors to consider as to what probably led to this. One, I'm sure in a lot of people's minds, is the deal that Turner Networks made to obtain the broadcasting rights and license to the NHL, thus kind of confirming that the NHL will be on TNT on Wednesday nights. And instead of wanting to be preempted on their premiere night, they've decided, okay, instead of remaining on TNT, we'll just go to TBS, which I guess makes sense. So one could speculate, if not pretty much confirm, that the NHL deal is one of the reasons they've made this decision to go from TNT to TBS. The other speculation, in fact, the other speculated factor, I should say, that comes into play is, of course, what I talked about, and a lot of people have been talking about over the past couple of days, and that is this WarnerMedia Discovery merger. And I'm assuming, and I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I'm assuming that because of this merger, Tony Khan and those at AEW, as well as those in charge at WarnerMedia that support AEW, probably don't want to chance the fact that something could happen potentially that could, derail AEW's future on the Turner Networks. So because of the fact that TNT is basically looked at as their premier network for all things sports, movies, and stuff like that, they made the decision to take the safe route and go to TBS, probably hoping that when this merger between WarnerMedia and Discovery Communications or Discovery Incorporated is finalized, that going to TBS will be a safe bet to remain on the Turner networks. And that's also a good thought, and that is also a good, business decision or good business directive to go in, because if you have something that's a rating success, for one network on a family of networks, and thus you're hoping you'll get the same success when you move it over to TBS, you don't want to chance the fact that despite being a success, that whatever changes may come from the front offices, you're hoping that whatever changes come from the front offices won't affect you. Because I'm sure Tony Khan and those at AEW, along with the fans, basically know that, history could repeat itself nearly 20 years later or over 20 years later, because everybody knows that when leadership and stuff was changed up during, during Turner becoming part of Time Warner, that Time Warner, AOL, the people in charge there, or at least one of the people there, didn't want wrestling on the programming because they didn't like it and they felt it didn't fit, the directive they wanted to go in. So I'm sure that's, that's a thought that's gotten into the minds of not just Tony Khan and those working at AEW and all that, but also the fans that, they want to try to avoid history repeating itself. So it's better to move it to a network that's, used to be a priority, but not as much of a priority anymore, unless, let's say, it's, the NBA, unless it's the NCAA tournament or maybe the MLB playoffs. It's a safer bet to go over to that network, possibly hoping that they might remain on the Turner networks after it's all said and done. But, as we know, nothing is for sure. Making these deals and everything to bring Rampage into the fold starting August 11th on Friday nights. The decision to move both it and Dynamite to TBS from TNT starting next year is a good move too. As well as the announcement of having various specials sprawled throughout the rest of this year before the move from TNT to TBS. Even though these are all good decisions and everything that are being made, with AEW's benefit and the fans of AEW's benefit in mind, it still doesn't equal, I should say, to the fact that AEW, could potentially, be removed. They still could be removed from the schedule. They can, like I said, they can make all these moves, they can make all these deals and everything, and make all these announcements, and for the time being, it might be great. But after this merger is completed by mid-2022 or later or even earlier, that might all change. That might all change to the point that before you know it, you might be hearing, Fightful.com, Sean Ross Sapp over there. You might be hearing Mike Johnson. You might be hearing No DQ. You might be hearing Pro Wrestling Unlimited, coming out and saying that the new Warner Discovery merger or company or group or whatever they're going to be called has decided to axe, AEW from the Turner networks, and now AEW has to go look for another, television home. That could happen. Not saying it will and everything, because all these moves they're making and all these announcements they're making sounds like they're basically making sure that they have a kind of like a safe space for them, a safe space, kind of like a backup, if you will, just in case something happens, a safety net, if you will, just in case something happens that could affect them. But again, that still doesn't mean anything. It could mean nothing at all. Potentially what you're looking at is just a temporary solution to something that may not be permanent. They could show them all the ratings and high viewerships that it's getting, and the silver lining, like I've mentioned before, and I'm sure others have mentioned, is, Discovery is known, obviously, for being not a top tier, but being someone that's a sports leader, if you will, or at least somebody that is reliable when it comes to showcasing sports. So that's a silver lining that plays in their favor. But even so, the shareholders on both sides may be like, you know what, the sports we're talking about is basketball, hockey, baseball, stuff like that. And wrestling may not be, considered, or pro wrestling, AEW may not be considered, to be in that category. And they could decide, yeah, let's just get rid of it. Let's just axe it from our network and, have it find a new home somewhere else. They could do that. They could do that. And, again, would it make sense for them to come out and make that announcement that AEW is not going to fit the directive? Yeah, it would make sense because, they're the bosses. They're the ones that have the final say. And if they say, hey, we don't want AEW part of our new directive, our new motives, our new directive, our new, our new mindset, if you will, then yeah, they can make the decision that AEW gets removed. But for right now, it's only speculation, a speculating question of what does the future hold. And when you put into account all these announcements that are being made by them, Rampage being added on to the television schedule on the Turner networks, the move of both Rampage and Dynamite to TBS next year, the various specials that they have to coincide with that transition of a move going into next year for the rest of this year. That might be all great and everything. That might be all swell and everything. And that might be something that, from a business perspective, does convince, the new overlords, as you would want to call them, of this merger to keep AEW on the Turner networks. But again, that's all a big, what if. That's a big what if factor, or that's a big, that's a big, what's the word I'm looking for? That's a big risk to take. It's a big, what if, big what if, big risk, big gamble, basically, that's the word I'm looking for, big gamble to take, and basically making all these announcements, doing all these moves and everything to try to convince maybe to stay on, to convince maybe to keep them on the network. Because again, the first factor that everybody will point out is the NHL and it coming to Turner and potentially more than likely TNT that made the decision, kind of easy for Tony Khan, WarnerMedia, and AEW to make to move Dynamite and Rampage to TBS. But also you would have to think the whole, potential WarnerMedia Discovery merger is another factor that's playing in to, to Tony Khan and WarnerMedia and those at WarnerMedia that are part of this, along with those in charge at AEW. You have to believe that merger or potential merger between both sides is another reason they've decided to go this route. But, we'll have to see in the months to come exactly what happens. Again, the estimated time for this deal to be finalized between Discovery and WarnerMedia is mid-2022. The expected and estimated time for NHL games to officially begin broadcasting on Turner Networks is the start of the NHL season later this year. So I'm assuming as time goes on, we'll find out more. Now, according to Pro Wrestling Unlimited, we'll probably hopefully find out, Tony Khan, I should say, has told us that, or has made the announcement that we'll find out more information as to what's going on as far as AEW and Turner and all that goes throughout the day with this upfront event that's going on for WarnerMedia. As well as we'll also find out more, more ideas and details as to what the potential merger between both WarnerMedia and Discovery, could lend itself to. I mean, for all we know, it could be just like what Disney's doing. Disney purchased Marvel, Lucasfilms, and all that. And even though they could have the final say in how certain things go, or certain things here and there, they usually leave, or at least attempt to leave, both areas to their own devices. They basically attempt to leave them to their own devices. That might all change maybe in the future, but with things going on over there. But right now, as far as we know, they leave them to their own devices. And if anything does come up, they address it. The same thing with the purchase of 20th Century Studios, formerly 20th Century Fox. They allow them to be left to their own devices. Like, they're under the Disney umbrella, but they allow them to stay to their own devices. And you'll just do their own thing unless something comes up, or unless they want to do some kind of little crossover for like a short or something like that. But really, that potentially is what could happen with WarnerMedia and Discovery's merger. Like, they could just, leave things as they are, and not act like things are really changing. I mean, I'm assuming one of the things they want to do, from what one of the reports says, is they want the creators to have the focus. And if you think creators, you would have to think that also applies to network television and shows that are on network television like AEW. But again, we'll have to see what occurs in the upcoming months and the upcoming year as to what is all involved. And hopefully maybe we'll get more information coming out today as to what AEW's future could be like, even after the move over to TBS next year, and potentially how the merger could affect that between Discovery and WarnerMedia, and whether or not this change in contract strategy, or restructuring, I should say, this contract restructuring, will help along the way to keep them on the Turner networks, or if history could end up repeating itself 22 years later. We'll have to just see what gets reported, throughout the day and throughout the next year or so. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are. How do you think this is going to affect AEW Dynamite and its new show AEW Rampage, even after they move from TNT to TBS starting next year? Do you think, we're just over-analyzing this? Or do you think there might be, reasoning to the move? Like, again, the obvious being the NHL coming to the Turner networks, as well as the potential merger between the two companies of WarnerMedia and Discovery. Do you think there could be, could any of those, besides the first one I just mentioned, be reasonings for the change? And do you think maybe the restructuring and the contract and the change of networks is going to potentially help keep AEW on the Turner networks for the foreseeable future? We know that the contract is up around 2023, 2024, with an option for 2024, I believe. But will this be enough to try to get them an extension further down the line? Or do you think maybe they need to start planning to look for a new home, network-wise, in the future? Let me know what your thoughts are. Comment if you like, and I will talk to y'all later.